It's good afternoon now. So I'm going to start off with a very emotional, moving story. So prepare yourselves. If you have Kleenex at your table, you may want to grab them. So in 1981, a young boy immigrated to Canada from England, and he had a dream. And that dream was something that made no sense to anybody. He spoke about this dream too. He wanted 1,500 Twitter followers by the end of 2018. And Twitter didn't exist. Nobody knew what he was talking about. But that boy was me. And I'm now at this conference 123 followers away from that 1,500 dream. So if you want to help a young 5-year-old boy from England meet that goal, your means of doing so are right there. So I'm actually going to talk to you today about the kind of much bigger picture labor market trends that we're seeing in Canada, how technology might impact the trajectory of some of those trends, and what really that means for jobs, skills, and then finally what it means for immigration policy. I have been told many times this is a very pessimistic presentation, so it's probably a good send-off into lunch where you can hopefully reorient yourself and get a little bit more optimistic through conversations with others in the room. So first point is, in terms of longer term trends we're seeing over the last 30 to 40 years in Canada, there's really, I would say, 2 or 3 that are worth paying attention to. Number one is income inequality. We are all probably familiar with the notion that the top 1% in Canada, the top 10% in Canada and other advanced economies are getting outsized shares of income gains. I mean, from between 1975 and 2007, the top 1% of earners in Canada took home 37% of income growth in the country. A second key trend that's worth noting is this notion of wage stagnation. This chart on the screen now shows you real wage growth in Canada between 1961 and 2013. You can see from 1961 till about early 1980s, there was steady progressive wage growth in the country. So as the economy was growing by 3 or 4% a year, so too were people's wages going up by that level. Over the past 30 years or so, that has really flatlined. If you look at, for example, in Ontario, between 1997 and 2016, non-management and non-professional workers have seen zero wage growth adjusted for inflation. So if you want to question where is populism coming from, what are the roots of populism, it's the fact, I mean, in my view, that from too many people in society, whether it's in Canada or other advanced economies, they're hearing their governments tell them things are going wonderfully, the economy is booming, unemployment is at record lows, but they're not seeing any change in their wage or paycheck at the end of the month or at the end of every 2 weeks. They're working harder than ever, the treadmill is moving faster than ever, and they're getting no further ahead. So to give you a sense of how that breaks down distributionally, this chart shows you income growth for economic households in both Canada and Ontario between mid-70s and early 2012-2015 time period. So about a 35-year time period. So the far left bar is the bottom 10% of income earners. So this is by decile. Second bar is bottom 20 or 10 to 20th percentile. So you can see folks in the bottom 30% or so of income the bottom 30% of households in terms of income distribution are losing ground over time. Their incomes are actually lower adjusted for inflation than they were in the mid-1970s. So again, that's what's really important here. The overall aggregate numbers mask what's happening to certain people in society, and that income ladder is becoming increasingly slippery. So those at the bottom are falling further and further down the ladder. The top 10%, the top 20% are doing wonderfully, and those numbers are driving that average to look fairly good. And a second key trend we need to pay attention to is the rise of precarious work. 40, 50 years ago, most people entering the labor market were in what we called standard employment relationships. They had a full-time job with pension and benefits from a single employer. Increasingly today, we're entering a world of more part-time employees, more temporary employees, more self-employed, more multiple job holders. In Ontario, about 1/3 of workers are estimated to be in vulnerable, precarious positions today. What about technology? We all hear about robots are coming to steal our jobs. We won't have a future. We'll all be kind of part of this wonderful big machine where we're kind of being fed food pellets by vending machines, and we won't have any work to do. So is that the case? Is that not the case? I'll talk a little bit about that now. I mean, one key feature of these new digital firms, the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks of the world, is they employ far fewer people than large firms would have employed 40 years ago. AT&T in the 60s had 750,000 employees as the most valuable company in Canada. Today, Google and Apple have 50, 60,000 employees, so about 1/15 the number of employees. So they're generating huge wealth. They're trillion-dollar companies, but the wages that are being kind of parsed out through that wealth are going to a very small handful of people. So it kind of goes back to that chart of the income deciles. The top 10% are going to be doing wonderfully in this new digital world, but what about the rest of us? What about automation of industry? I mean, again, we're hearing that certain kinds of jobs are going to be less likely to be in demand in the future. This chart shows you 4 different job categories in the United States over the past 35 years or so. The numbers are pretty much exactly the same in Canada. There are 4 lines on this chart. It's a little hard to read, so I'll just very quickly describe this to you. So the top red line, which has seen steady job growth over the past 35 years, those are non-routine cognitive jobs. So probably what most of the people in this room would be engaged in. You're using your mind. What you do changes on an hour-to-hour, day-to-day basis. You're a policy advisor. You're an engineer. You're an architect. You're a graphic designer. So those jobs have been doing terrifically well. Bottom line, which has also seen steady growth, non-routine manual jobs. So people in the skilled trades, for example, electricians, plumbers. What they do changes task to task, hour to hour. They're using their hands for a living. Those middle 2 lines, which are stagnating and actually starting to decline, those are routine jobs. So routine cognitive jobs, routine manual jobs. A forklift driver who's driving boxes from one end of a warehouse to another, a telemarketer who's calling people up and saying much the same thing to everybody they speak to. Again, this is looking backwards. If we project forward, what is computer software, what is artificial intelligence going to be very good at? It's going to be very good at replacing routine functions. What are robotics going to be particularly good at? Replacing routine functions. It's really hard, though, to build a robot or design computer software that operates in a highly fluid, variable, dynamic environment. So if we were telling young people what types of jobs should you be focusing on in the future, if we're looking at immigrants coming into the country, what types of skills do we want? What types of people with what types of occupational backgrounds? We want people who are in those non-routine functions. Those routine types of jobs, whether cognitive or manual, are likely to start to wane or decline in sheer number over the next number of years. There's a lot of studies estimating how many jobs that exist in Canada today are going to be automated out of existence. I'm not going to spend much time on this. The methodologies are all very different, but you're looking at as low as 5% of existing jobs may not exist in 10 to 20 years, to a number as high as 45 to 50% of existing jobs. Key point to remember here is, even though jobs that exist today may be eliminated and may not exist in 20 years, many other new jobs will be created in that time as well. I mean, and that's a normal part of our economy, a normal part of our labor market. Jobs and occupations are destroyed, eliminated as a result of technological progress, and new jobs are created as well. The challenge, however, for policymakers is the uncertainty around those projections. Are we talking about seismic shifts in our labor market, or are we talking about incremental small shifts? And the other key concern for policymakers is the distributional impacts of these technological advances. They are going to hit low-wage workers much harder than they're going to hit high-wage workers. This chart shows you kind of based on income levels or hourly wages, what are the vulnerability of certain groups to automation. And the numbers are much higher for folks making under $15 an hour than those making over $33 an hour. So again, uncertainty, increased pace of change, more disruption, more volatility. That's a really challenging environment for policymakers to operate in. I talked to a lot of folks in government in Canada and in other countries. They're all really concerned about this future of work issue, but none of them know what to do or when to do it. So by way of example, in terms of the pace of disruption, 150 years ago, half of Canadians lived or worked on farms. That a slow, steady decline now sees that number sit at 2%. So that gave governments, that gave people, that gave communities generations to adjust to this transition of people living and working in rural communities and moving to cities, working in manufacturing and other service-related occupations. We today have 500,000 Canadians who drive for a living. Autonomous vehicles could be fairly wide-scale in their adoption in 5, 10, 15 years. So we could be talking about 500,000 Canadians out of work within a relative blink of an eye. How do we train those 45-year-old bus drivers for new occupations when they still have 20 to 25 years left in their working lives? One of the answers to that question from policymakers is, well, we need to focus on training. We need to focus on skills adjustment programs. Canada sits at the bottom of the table here when we look at how much public spending we put into skills training as a percentage of GDP. We're about 7th on this list. We're 1/5 or 1/6 the number of countries like Denmark and Sweden spend. If you look at private sector numbers, private sector employers spend about 30 to 40% less on training their employees now than they did in the early 1990s. So if government is not spending on training our employees, if private sector employers are not spending on training their employees, who is going to help people transition between jobs in this increasingly volatile labor market? What about jobs of the future? Where are the jobs of the future going to exist? There's, I think, a general consensus that the high human touch jobs, health, nursing, education, those types of jobs aren't going anywhere anytime soon. We like the notion that our elderly parents, our children are being taken care of by people, not by robots. I'll talk in a minute about some societies having a different perspective there. What kind of skills are we talking about? Social and emotional intelligence, adaptability, creativity. People are going to be knocked on their rear ends more frequently in the labor market of the future. They're going to have to be able to dust themselves off, get up, and rejoin the labor market. What does this all mean for immigration? I mean, there's kind of not a lot of research around this, so we put together some speculative thoughts for this presentation. But I mean, in 2040, 25% of Ontario's population will be 65 years or older, compared to only 16% today. So we're going to need more people we know who can help people who are aging, whether that's in their homes or in long-term care facilities. We're going to need more care workers in our society. Where are they going to come from? Are they going to come from abroad? Are we going to have those people domestically? If you look at other countries, I mean, interesting thing is some places like Japan, where they have even a more aging population than we do, they don't have really any significant levels of immigration to supplement their labor force, are turning to automation and artificial intelligence to help solve labor market challenges. So if you look at the so-called robo or kind of care robots that are helping seniors in their homes, all of that is being developed in Japan. That's where you're actually seeing those types of technologies being deployed quickly. In the U.S. under Trump, he's notoriously cracked down on immigration from particularly Mexico and Central American countries. That was a significant source of labor for the agriculture sector in the U.S. We're starting to see large-scale agricultural producers turn more to technology since they can't turn to cheap human labor to fill those job gaps. When we look at the numbers in Canada, these are the top 10 jobs in Canada for immigrants, and we have on the far right side, what is the likelihood of those jobs being automated over the next 10 to 20 years? So the number one job for immigrants in Canada today is food counter attendants and kitchen helpers. That job has a 90+% chance of being automated out of existence. The number 5 job is cashiers, 97% chance of those jobs being automated out of existence. Here are the 6 to 10 categories. You can see financial auditors and accountants, 94%. I got in a huge amount of trouble from accountants in the room last time I talked about this, saying accountants are not going anywhere. So caveat that, maybe they won't be eliminated, maybe they won't, but the numbers say 94%. But you can see the 10th highest job for immigrants in Canada today is registered nurses and registered psychiatric nurses. That's a 0.9% probability of automation. That feeds into the notion I was speaking about earlier. Health, those human touch occupations, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. When we compare this to the broader labor market, there's really not a huge distinction. Immigrants kind of reflect the types of jobs most Canadians have. I mean, there's slight over and underrepresentation in certain industries, but we don't really see immigrants as being more likely to be automated out of their current positions than we would people who are born in Canada. So concluding thoughts, policy observation, should we start thinking about a technology screen on the skills that prospective immigrants have? If we know certain types of occupations, certain types of skills won't be in demand in a future where technology, artificial intelligence, and automation are taking root, should we put a lower value on those types of skills for people who are moving into the country. How do we ensure the long-term coherence of our immigration policy in light of this medium-term to long-term uncertainty in the labor market? What if we don't have enough jobs for people? Should we be raising immigration levels to record highs or not? I mean, that's kind of a conversation we haven't really had in any substantive way yet. I mean, I would argue that the drivers of our economy over the past 3 decades have been women's labor force participation, the commodity boom, and trade deals. None of those things are going to be nearly as significant in the next 20 to 30 years as they have been. So I would argue immigration will actually be a key driver of our economy going forward. And then finally, I mean, in the labor market, where likely soft skills are going to be prized more than ever. So it's kind of it's those things that make you particularly human are going to be more and more important to help people get good paying, meaningful jobs. How can we ensure immigrants have those soft skills and aren't just being trained in kind of the hard skills? Can you do X type of coding or B type of math? It's more about how do you interact in a team? How do you work interpersonally with your colleagues? And then finally, how do we ensure newly landed immigrants have access to adequate skills training? Of unemployed Canadians today, only 39% have access to EI, which dictates access to many skills training programs. Numbers for recent immigrants are far, far lower than that. So if we want people to have skills, if we want them to be successful in the labor market, who's investing, where are they investing, and how are they investing? So I think I'm 40 seconds over time, but we can stop now. Thank you.
Thank you.